In 1998, deep inside the Vatican secret archives, a group of restorers stumbled upon something that was never meant to be found. While repairing part of the 14th century records wing, they uncovered a hidden wall, and behind it, a heavy lead chest sealed with 6 padlocks. Every inch of the metal was etched with Latin warnings: "Whoever opens this will suffer eternal excommunication." Another line read, "What rests here must remain forgotten. God have mercy on the one who dares to read these words." After weeks of debate among senior cardinals, the chest was finally opened. Inside lay a single manuscript, bound in human skin. Carbon-14 testing dated it precisely to 1334. What it contained was so horrifying that 2 curators resigned on the spot and another requested transfer to another continent. It turned out to be Pope John's personal diary, not the official one filled with decrees and letters, but his secret journal written alone after midnight. And what those pages revealed, written in ink later proven to be mixed with his own blood, were the most shocking blasphemies ever recorded from the head of the Catholic Church. "I curse God for placing this crown upon me," one entry read, dated March 1334. "I curse Christ for his silence. I curse the Holy Spirit for abandoning me in this golden cage. If hell exists, I am already inside it, and if the devil lives, he wears my crown." But the horror doesn't stop there. John XXII wasn't just another corrupt pope. He was among the most powerful men of the Middle Ages, builder of the papal palace in Avignon, ruler of kings, and the man who shaped Catholic laws still in force today. Yet, for 18 years, every midnight, he supposedly descended into a sealed chamber beneath his private chapel to curse the very God he represented. After his death, the Vatican erased almost every trace of his existence. History books barely mention him, and none explain why. But now, with the rediscovery of that forbidden diary and once classified Vatican papers, the truth finally resurfaced, and it's far darker than anyone expected. Jacques Duez was born in 1244 in Corsica to a modest merchant family. He wasn't noble or wealthy, just exceptionally brilliant. He studied medicine and canon law in Paris and Montpellier, soon becoming one of the most respected theologians of his age. By 40, he was a bishop, by 60, a cardinal, and at 72, in 1316, he was chosen as pope. Yet there's one thing most historians never mention: Jacques never wanted the job. Letters to his brother before the election revealed his dread of power. He had seen what the papacy did to men, how it twisted their faith, turned them into tyrants who ruled in God's name while losing God entirely. "The papacy is not an honor," he wrote, "it's a punishment, and I do not wish to be condemned." Ironically, that's exactly why the cardinals chose him. They wanted someone old, compliant, and easy to control, a weak placeholder who wouldn't last long. But fate betrayed them. Jacques Duez, now Pope XXII, would live to be 90 and rule with iron discipline for nearly 2 decades. First few years seemed normal. John settled in Avignon, far from Rome's political chaos. He built the grandest palace in Europe, amassed treasures rivaling kings, and issued decrees that expanded church power beyond anything before. But in his private writings, a different story began to unfold. In a 1320 entry, 4 years after his election, he confessed, "I have prayed endlessly, yet God stays silent. I have fasted nearly to death, and Christ does not answer. I am starting to believe this throne is cursed, that whoever sits upon it can no longer hear God, because God has stopped speaking." That was the start of his descent. The moment faith turned to doubt, and doubt began to rot into fury. The breaking point came in 1323. The Franciscan monks claimed that Jesus and the apostles owned no possessions, that the church should live in the same poverty. But John, ruling from a palace richer than any king's, declared that idea heresy. To defend the church's wealth, he had to justify everything Christ rejected. That night, he wrote, "I studied the Gospels and realized something terrible. Christ told us to give all to the poor, to store no treasure on earth, to live as beggars. Yet I live as an emperor. If Christ was right, I am the Antichrist. And if I am right, then Christ was wrong. Either way, I am damned. That was when the nightly rituals began, his unrecorded war with faith. According to letters from Cardinal Francesco Orsini, John ordered a secret chamber built beneath the papal chapel. Only he had the key. No one was allowed inside when the Pope descended at midnight, and every night, precisely at midnight, he would descend alone beneath the palace. The guards at the staircase claimed they heard shouts, Latin words hurled in anger, and the sound of objects shattering, but none dared to interrupt, because it was the Pope, and popes, by definition, could not be wrong. What he performed down there was a ritual of reversal, a deliberate act of desecration. He would take the holy sacraments, bless the bread and wine as tradition required, and then crush them beneath his feet. He muttered the sacred prayers backwards, twisting them into curses directed not at demons, but at God himself. One surviving entry in his diary from 1325 reveals his growing torment. Tonight, I begged God to appear, to give me a sign that he is real, that suffering has meaning. Nothing. Only silence. So I stopped praying. I began cursing, and in cursing, I found more comfort than in 1,000 unanswered prayers. Things took an even darker turn in 1331, when John delivered a sermon that nearly tore the church apart. He declared that even the souls of saints do not enter heaven immediately after death. They must wait until the final judgment. This contradicted centuries of Catholic doctrine. The cardinals were horrified. Kings threatened to cut ties with Rome. The University of Paris accused the Pope of teaching heresy, but what no one realized was that this wasn't theology, it was despair. In his private writings, John confessed, "I have proclaimed that heaven does not yet exist because I fear it never has. I've spent my life promising the faithful a paradise I've never seen, never felt, never proven. And if it's all a lie, then perhaps we've built our faith upon a mirage. What if God is not love, but silence? What if Christ never rose, and we are worshipping the echo of our own desperation?" Those words, written by the supreme head of the church, were enough to condemn him as a heretic. Had anyone read them then, John would have been excommunicated or executed, but no one did, because each night after writing, John hid his diary in a secret compartment behind a crucifix in his private quarters. The same crucifix which, according to servants, he always kept turned toward the wall. Soon, his behavior began to unravel. He became erratic, suspicious. He accused allies of plotting against him, dismissed servants without cause, and avoided public mass, delegating it to lesser bishops. But what unsettled Rome most was his appearance. Portraits from his final years depict a hollow-faced old man with dark rings beneath his eyes and a constant look of terror. An anonymous painter in 1333 noted in his journal, "His eyes no longer catch the light. They stare into something no other soul can see." And then came the night that almost exposed everything. It was August 15th, the Feast of the Assumption. John descended as usual into the hidden chamber, but that night something went wrong. Hours passed. A secretary, alarmed by his absence, defied orders and went below. He found the Pope collapsed on the cold stone floor, surrounded by extinguished black candles and walls scrawled with strange symbols, possibly in blood. In his hand, John clutched a shattered crucifix. The secretary swore he heard him whisper, "Forgive me, Satan, I have served the wrong master." The man was silenced, paid off in gold, and threatened into silence. The chamber was cleansed, sealed, and never spoken of again. But John's diary tells what truly happened that night. "I have reached the bottom of the abyss and learned the abyss is truth. God does not exist, and if he does not care." Modern psychiatrists who've studied his writings detect signs of severe depression, perhaps bipolar disorder, or even the onset of dementia. At nearly 80, his mind may have been deteriorating. Yet others offer a far more disturbing theory, that he was perfectly sane, that his blasphemies weren't madness, but the result of terrible clarity about his own role and the silence of the divine. Religious historians note that the 14th century was an age of spiritual crisis. The Black Death would soon arrive in 1347, killing a third of Europe, and for many, even God seemed to have vanished. The papal schism would split Christianity in two, and men like John XXII, who held supreme authority at the height of church power, were witnesses to its deep-seated hypocrisy. The Pope lived in grand palaces while preaching humility. He blessed wars while proclaiming peace. He accepted wealth in exchange for absolution while condemning the destitute for taking bread to survive. And all of this in the name of a God who was supposedly love and justice. Was it insanity to recognize this contradiction, or insanity to ignore it entirely? In his diary, penned thoughts that feel startlingly modern. If God exists and allows children to starve while I dine on golden plates, then God is a monster. If God does not exist, then my life has been a lie. Either way, cursing him seems the only honest act. Neurologists who have examined his case note a revealing detail. He reported suffering from severe migraines, chronic insomnia, and dark visions. Today, these symptoms could indicate temporal lobe epilepsy, a condition capable of producing intense mystical experiences, both ecstatic and terrifying. It is possible the midnight rituals were neurological episodes misinterpreted as acts of heresy. Or perhaps it was a combination, a man whose medical condition amplified his genuine spiritual doubts. The truth remains unknowable, but what is clear is that the Vatican went to extreme lengths to suppress this story. John died on December 4, 1334, at the age of 90, officially from natural causes. Unofficial accounts suggest he may have been poisoned by cardinals who could no longer tolerate his erratic behavior. What happened immediately after his death is where the conspiracy truly begins. According to documents uncovered in 2003 by Italian historian Francesca Lombardi, Cardinal Bertrand de Deo, the first to enter the Pope's private chambers, discovered the secret diary. He read it through the night and summoned an emergency meeting with the 6 most powerful cardinals at dawn. Their initial instinct was destruction. The diary should be burned. But Bertrand argued otherwise. If we destroy it and someone else knows of its existence, we will be accused of a cover-up. If we hide and seal it, we control the narrative. What cannot be seen cannot be questioned. And so, that is exactly what they did. They placed the diary in a lead casket, concealed it in the deepest Vatican Archives, and initiated a systematic campaign to erase every trace of John's darkest years. Letters were burned, chronicles rewritten, historians bribed, witnesses intimidated. Servants who had heard the midnight screams were exiled to distant monasteries under strict vows of silence. Guards were sent abroad on missions. The secret chamber beneath the chapel was sealed in concrete. Yet, as always, faint clues remained. The official records of the Vatican reveal an unusual gap covering the last 5 years of John's papacy. Documents skip from 1329 to 1334 with striking brevity. When John XXII is mentioned in later records, it is always with a peculiar phrase treated with extreme caution. Modern historians have decoded it as a Vatican warning. This is a dangerous topic. Do not investigate further. For centuries, the strategy worked. John was remembered as a powerful, controversial pope. No one asked deeper questions. Until 1998, when restoration work unearthed casket. When the diary was analysed, the Vatican faced an impossible choice: admit the truth or maintain the cover-up. They opted for compromise. Scholars were allowed restricted access under strict confidentiality. Edited summaries were published, hinting at his internal struggles but omitting the blasphemous details. Even in 2012, when 3 historians formally requested access to the full diary, they were denied. Public protests were met with an official statement. Some historical documents, while academically intriguing, do not contribute to the spiritual edification of the faithful. Access will remain restricted. Translation: the truth is too dangerous. The most unsettling part of this story is not that a pope suffered a crisis of faith, but that he may not have been alone. Historians looked for patterns in other papacies, and what they found was alarming. At least 4 other medieval popes have suspiciously incomplete biographies. Popes whose final words were erased. Popes whose private chambers were destroyed immediately after death. Benedict XI, who followed John XXII, ordered the destruction of his predecessor's personal effects, officially to cleanse the palace, unofficially to eliminate evidence. Clement VI, who reigned from 1342 to 1352, vanished from the public eye for 6 months in 1347, leaving no records of his activities. When he returned, courtiers claimed he seemed like an entirely different man. And then there is the extreme case, the Pope who never existed. Vatican records show a discontinuity in the sequence of popes named John. There is a John XII, but no official John X. Historians have debated this gap for centuries. Emerging theories from fragmentary medieval letters suggest that John X did exist, but reigned only 3 weeks in the 11th century before being deposed by the cardinals. His crime: publicly rejecting transubstantiation, the central doctrine of the Eucharist, and being erased from history so completely that even his name was removed from the papal sequence as if he had never existed. These cases suggest something deeply unsettling. John's crisis of faith was not a singular anomaly, but part of a pattern, one the Vatican has laboured for centuries to hide. Because if the world knew that popes, the supposed earthly representatives of God, also doubted, also blasphemed, also buckled under the crushing weight of impossible responsibility, what would remain of the Church's authority? The power of the papacy does not rest on the truth of its claims, but on the illusion of absolute certainty, and that illusion cannot survive human doubt. That is why John was erased, not for evil, but for honesty. And honesty, at the highest levels of religious power, is the most unforgivable sin. Final days were a torment. Witnesses reported he ceased eating, ceased sleeping. Nights were spent sitting upright in his bed, eyes fixed on the crucifix on the wall, whispering words that no one could understand. His personal physician, Dr. Guillaume Dugan, noted in private records, "The Holy Father no longer seems to reside in this world. He speaks with invisible presences. At times he laughs without reason, at other times he cries like a child. I have observed this in the elderly whose minds fragment, but there is something different here. It is as though His Holiness is engaged in a conversation, and that conversation terrifies him. On the night of his death, he demanded solitude. The cardinals objected, but he persisted. I have lived as a fraud. At least let me die honestly." The door was closed, and according to the guard outside, a final conversation could be heard. He spoke loudly, as if answering someone. "So, you finally come after all these years of silence. Why now? Why? Not when I needed you. No, it is too late. I fear you no longer. I desire you no longer. Take me where you will, or leave me in nothingness. It is the same. For I have discovered this. Hell is not a place one goes after death. Hell is the life lived when one pretends to believe in that which the soul knows to be a lie." And then silence. When the door was opened, he was dead, seated upright in his bed, eyes open, staring. In his hand was a page torn from his diary, later discovered centuries after his passing. On it, in shaky script, he had written a final entry: "I have sought God all my life and found only silence. I have cursed him through the night and found only echo. Now, at the end, I wonder if God and silence are the same. If so, then all prayers were addressed to nothing, and at least nothing never deceives." His funeral was the grandest of the century. Thousands attended. Edicts proclaimed him holy, wise, glorious. Yet privately, the cardinals exhaled in relief, believing the secret had died with him. Or so they thought. John XXII's story confronts us with an uncomfortable question. What happens when the one who should hold all answers discovers that he has none? When God's representative on earth no longer hears God? He was not a monster. He was a man trapped in an impossible role, a role demanding absolute certainty in a world full of doubt, demanding moral perfection from inherently imperfect beings. Psychologists who study spiritual burnout recognize a pattern among high-level religious leaders. A crisis of faith is almost inevitable when the weight of responsibility surpasses human capacity. And when it occurs, the institution has two choices: support the leader's humanity or destroy him to protect the illusion of infallibility. The Vatican chose the latter, establishing a dangerous precedent. Truth must be sacrificed to preserve faith. Yet, paradoxically, in erasing doubt, the Vatican revealed the true basis of its power: not truth, but control over the narrative. And that, ironically, validates John XXII's suspicion. Centuries after his death, his forbidden diary whispers from the shadows. It reminds us that even the most powerful men of faith are terrified, that even popes can weep in darkness, and that the difference between saint and heretic often comes down to who controls the records. The ultimate question is not whether John XXII was heretic. The question is, why were they so terrified of the truth being known? If this story made you question the official narratives of power and faith, subscribe to uncover more secrets the institutions strive to keep buried. And in the comments, tell us, was John a heretic or the most honest man ever to sit on the throne of St. Peter? Your answer may reveal more about your own relationship with faith than you realize.